And so we're home now, getting over jet lag, so that's good. Still taking naps in the afternoon, at least I am, but it's all good. So this is the last installment. It's about traveling home, and yeah.
Yeah, this is the post-trip summary and the catching up on how we got home, which turned out to be a little bit of an adventure.
Yes, right. Right, and I'm looking at Jim's notes here, which he made, and I don't have my glasses on. But, oh, yeah, so we left the hotel in Tel Aviv.
Right. No.
No, Jerusalem.
Jerusalem.
Yeah, on December 18th. It was an easy morning. The travel company called a taxi for us, but it was an interesting ride to the airport. Our taxi driver, we started asking him questions, asked if he was Palestinian, and he said no, he was Israeli Arab, which was interesting. And then there's a checkpoint to get right by the airport, and we were pulled over with Israelis carrying machine guns who wanted to check the credentials of the driver, mostly, and of us as well. So we sat and waited for a little while they looked over our papers and asked us questions, and then finally they went back and let us through to the airport. So that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, he also, with just a few questions, was telling us that he was pretty uneasy with the new Israeli government, and that he was seeing an uptick in violence against Palestinians, and proceeded to show us a video of these Palestinians that were being run over by a car repeatedly.
Yeah, that's what he said.
Right, and that Ben Gvir had said, "Oh well, it's nothing to see here," sort of thing. So the situation in Israel we have some forebodings about this. Anyways, we got to the Tel Aviv airport without any real difficulties, and we were surprised when we went to board the plane and we'd been upgraded to business class. And so we got champagne and
hey, we were on Air France in business class. Best food I've ever had on an airplane.
Yes.
And best service. It was like being in a nice restaurant.
It was. I had beef cheek, of all things, and I can't even remember what else. A very nice dessert, I think.
Yeah. And I had fish that was perfectly cooked, amazingly. So it was fun. And
so we got to Paris. We were feeling pretty good. We checked into the Marriott there, and that was utilitarian. It was the Marriott Courtyard. But, you know, we were able to find it and get into it. And the next morning we got onto the TGV at Charles de Gaulle, and it was a smooth ride. And I've got, I think, a short video just taken out the window with the camera just laid up against the window, and the ride was so smooth.
Yeah, 180 miles an hour through the countryside. What, an hour and 40 minutes from Paris to Brussels. And it's faster than an airplane because you don't have all the boarding before and after and that kind of thing. So it's wonderful.
got onto another train when we got off the TGV, a local train, and made it into downtown and found our hotel.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I got to tell you that ever since we got to Paris, it had been kind of rainy and gray, and Brussels was rainy and gray. And downtown Brussels was a bit of a labyrinth to find our way around in, and it took us a little bit to find our hotel. But our hotel was so unique. It was built, well, we don't know
built
when
in the 1400s originally.
Right. But I guess the downtown had been bombarded in some war in like
1690s, yeah.
Right. And so a lot of the buildings had been restored and rebuilt, and ours was rebuilt in 1697. So we had this quirky little hotel room that was hundreds of years old, with these huge windows that looked out onto the central square called Grand Place. And there was this nativity scene out there and a Christmas tree.
Yeah, a huge Christmas tree. And the Grand Place is touted as one of the most beautiful centers in all of Europe.
Yeah.
It was redone recently and has gold trim on it, and it is quite beautiful.
Right. Yeah, just great buildings. So we dropped our bags off and we went out to get frites, Belgian fries.
Oh yeah, they don't call them French fries. They're called Belgian frites, Belgian fries.
And so we went to a place called Frietland.
Yeah, right.
And I got mine with, what kind of a sauce was it?
I don't know, spicy sauce.
There was some sort of spicy, like Indian sauce, and you got...
I got mine with an Andalusian sauce, which had mayonnaise and vinegar and spices in it.
And then, so we ate our fries and just started walking around the streets.
And can I say, I was outraged at this Frietland because they had these large submarine sandwiches, sort of like submarine, and they had some kind of meat in them, very little that I could see, and then they stacked them up high like this with French fries. So there were people eating these giant submarines with
French fries
on them.
There's like a French fry sandwich with just a little bit of meat in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we walked around the streets and we saw a lot of Belgian waffle stands, which we did not partake of immediately.
Well, we were so full from the fries.
Yeah, so we ended up taking pictures of some of the buildings around the square and of the Christmas tree. And then we went to a Galleria de Royal or something like that.
The Rain, I think.
Yeah, it was rainy.
De la Reine, Queen.
Well, it had three parts. It had the Galleria of the Queen, and then the Galleria of the King, and then that side one was the Galleria of the Prince.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. And it was built in the 1840s, so it's one of the earliest glass-covered malls in the world. And these wonderful shops in it, most of whom were selling chocolate. We had thought that we were going to go to Brussels to go to the Christmas market to get Christmas things. We're going to end up getting chocolate.
Yeah, right.
And anyways, so we looked at all the chocolates there, and then we went out and walked around town because we wanted to see some of the sights. And I have some pictures of some of the graffiti, some of the, well, the murals painted actually. And of course we stopped at the famous Mannequin Peace, which is this bronze sculpture of this boy peeing with water squirting out of his penis.
Yeah, I know, like what?
And
they dress him up.
Right.
Although he wasn't dressed when we were there, I don't think, was he?
No, we had expected to see him in Christmas garb,
Yeah,
but
right.
he was in his nakedness.
Right.
So we joined the mobs of people taking pictures of him. We stopped off for a beer in kind of a stinky little restaurant.
Yeah.
Well,
it was really old.
Stinky little bar, yeah.
It had low ceilings, and I mean, it looked like it was from the 1400s.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was very old.
I'm sure it was. I think it was from the 15th century. You're right.
Mm-hmm. And at the bar, you got a flight of Belgian beers that were delicious. I mean, I'm not usually a beer drinker, but they were very little bitterness and very good.
Right. And returned to the hotel room to unpack and get organized, and then Salim came to visit us. Salim was the exchange student of Terry's sister's family 20 years ago.
30, I
30
think.
years
At
ago.
least 30.
And
35.
we had visited him 20 years ago in Grenoble.
Mm-hmm. And I say he was from Tunisia. He married a woman who was French, became a French citizen, and he now works in a European bank in Brussels, a large European bank. But he lives in France and commutes back and forth.
Yeah, he was delightful. God, what a wonderful guy. Mm-hmm. And we walked around Brussels looking at the lights, and he showed us where the antique sections were, and we talked about museums and churches, and he dropped us off at a restaurant because he had to get home.
Mm-hmm. And he had made reservations for us at the restaurant.
It was lovely.
It was nice.
We had a great meal at the restaurant, and then headed back to the hotel, where we were able to watch the Christmas light show.
Mm-hmm. Which happens every hour, on the hour, for about 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And they just light up all the buildings. It's very cool.
The next morning we got up, we went over and had breakfast at a place called Brewett's, which according to their pamphlet, the restaurant was purchased in 1439, but then had to be partially restored due to the bombardment in the 1690s, and so it was partially restored in 1697. So it doesn't have the original 15th century interior to it.
Big fireplace, lots of wood, lots of character.
Yeah, it was delightful. Good breakfast. And it came with a hotel room. Then we went chocolate shopping at the Galleria, and there we saw that people started singing and dancing. It was very festive. Then we decided to go to the Christmas market, and the Christmas market was frankly disappointing.
And it was probably a good half-mile walk to the Christmas market, and it was raining.
And it was cold.
And it was cold, and I had my Hoka walking shoes on, and they got wet, so my feet were cold. So it wasn't the best experience. And then the market was a disappointment. I had expected something more like the Ann Arbor Art Fair, where, you know, with homemade goods and things like that. And really, there were people selling the pashmina scarves from India, jewelry that was probably made in China or Czechoslovakia, who knows. There were a few places selling like nuts. There were some places selling glühwein, warm glühwein, the wine. But overall, it was like a flea market, I'd say.
Kind of, yeah.
So that was kind of interesting. So don't know that I'd go back.
Right. They had a nice Ferris wheel there, which we didn't go up on.
Right, it wasn't running.
They also had a really cute merry-go-round that was running, but was for kids, but had some really neat structures on it that kids could ride on. So we finished off the day going back, and I don't even remember the dinner that night. I think it was a light dinner. And then in the morning, we headed back to Paris. This is when the adventure begins, because we were worried about getting back to the train station because we had kind of wandered when we went from the train station to the hotel. And so we practiced a route to get back to the train station, where we cut through this interior mall and tried to plan out a route where we wouldn't have any stairs to go up, and thought we learned where the elevators were in the train station. And so in the morning, after our Brewett's breakfast, we headed over to the train station, and we got there okay. That part worked out well, but then we couldn't find one of our elevators.
Right.
And we looked around and looked around. It was hidden somewhere, but we got down to this other track, and we were waiting for our train, and the signage was confusing. And so we asked the person that worked there, you know, what was the train to Midi? And she didn't seem to understand us.
Well, I think we asked for the train for the airport.
Well,
and the airport in Brussels does not have the TGV station. It's at a different terminal.
You're right, but my recollection is we were asking for the train to Midi, and the woman got confused, and she offered up the airport. Like, Midi? Oh, airport? Sort of thing.
I remember that.
Yeah. And anyways, and so we said, yeah. So we got on the train to the airport, which of course went completely the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And we ended up missing our TGV.
Right.
Because we were now on this train to the airport, and the train to the airport was the inner city train, I think.
And it was slow. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we get to the airport, and we know even before we get to the airport that there's no way we're going to make our flight to the U.S.
Right.
So we get off at the airport and start trying to redo our flights, which is a nightmare because we can't get through to Delta.
Yeah, the only numbers we had to Delta were 800 numbers, which we couldn't call
and they didn't work
in Europe.
Right.
And
then we tried overseas adventure travel, and they were closed, so we got their answering service that didn't really know what they were doing. And finally, I saw that I could chat. So I got online to Delta in a chat, and the guy that I was chatting with said that I could change my reservations and sent me a link to do that. So I clicked on the link and was able to change our flights to the next day. And thank goodness, actually, there was no change fee, and they did have two seats available because it was filling up because people were trying to get back because of the bad weather that was predicted.
yeah,
So
this
we
was
felt
a huge winter storm
right.
was rolling in.
So we felt really lucky that we were able to get into the next day without a change in ticket money, you know, what we owed. So, but then we're at the airport, and Jim has gotten a new TGV from this Midi station, and so we now have to get from the airport to Midi. So while taking the train from where we had been in central Brussels to the airport was free, it was not free to get back to Midi. So we ended up going around and asking this fellow whose information helped 3 times, and he was so sweet. So anyway, he helped us get our tickets. We got back on and went back to Midi. Unfortunately, what we didn't realize is that the signs in Brussels are in French and Dutch, and I guess they also speak Flemish there. So the Dutch, and it's confusing when you look at the signs as to where you are going, because anyway, it's confusing. So we weren't watching as closely as we might have been, and we ended up going past our stop in Midi.
Right. So,
and all of a sudden, I'm saying to Jim, he's looking at his phone, I'm saying to Jim, we're in the countryside. This isn't Brussels. And we look up, and all these houses are going by, farms and things. And anyway, so there was a young couple across the way from us, and we said, well, what train are we on? And they said, well, you're on the inner city train. It goes from Brussels to Ghent without stops. So then we missed our second TGV when we go to Ghent, where this young couple helps us buy our tickets, shows us where we need to be. It was very sweet. And we get ready to go back to Brussels again and to buy another TGV ticket to get to Paris.
Yeah. But yeah, so we ended up buying 3 different TGV tickets trying to get to Paris.
That was not inexpensive.
It was, yeah, it was pretty pricey. And
I just want to say in our defense, usually before we go somewhere, we have guidebooks, and the guidebooks say, how do you get in and out of a country? What do you do with taxis, etc. But because we were going to be in Brussels for a day and a half, and it seemed shouldn't be hard, we didn't do that. If we had done that, we would have understood more about both the French and Dutch signage, and we wouldn't have been so confused. But anyway, lesson learned.
Yeah. So the signage, you know, when you look at these departure and arrival signs, how they'll flash, right? And sometimes they move around, and that's what these were doing. But they would alternate between French and Dutch, but they looked alike. And that was confusing because we wanted to go to Brussels-Midi, and when we got to Brussels-Midi, the sign said Brussels-Zoet. And so we thought, this isn't what we want, Brussels-Zoet. We want Brussels-Midi. So we stayed on the train. It turns out that Brussels-Zoet is the same station as Brussels-Midi. And that was what threw us off.
Yeah. So.
Anyways, we finally got onto the TGV and got to Paris, and this time we stayed at the Marriott residence, which was in the same building as the Marriott courtyard, but was much more comfortable.
Yeah, much nicer. And this Marriott, wouldn't you know it's France, this Marriott had a chef in their hotel restaurant. And the food was great.
We had a great meal.
And the food was really good.
And the next day we were able to get onto the airplane, but the airplane was full because they were packing people in because they were shutting down flights. Mm-hmm. And so we ended up kind of like the flight that we had when we first went from New York to Tel Aviv. We got the middle two seats in the center section. Mm-hmm. But because we weren't the last people onto the airplane, we could at least put our bags up above, and it was a little bit more comfortable than the seats going over.
Right.
So we finally got home, and were picked up at the airport and whisked home by our daughter. It was great. And our granddaughter. So we're home, we made it. Next, New Zealand. Ta-ta.